The British royal family has always had rules. Unwritten rules, mostly. Rules about what is acceptable and what is not. Rules about who gets protected and who gets left to face the world alone. Rules about which scandals get managed quietly and which ones get punished publicly. And in the past 5 years, two of the most dramatic exits from royal life in modern history have forced those rules into the light. They have forced a question that the palace has never comfortably answered. Why did the institution treat Andrew and Meghan so differently? And what does that difference tell us about how power really works inside the House of Windsor? Tonight, we are telling the full verified story of two royal crises that happened at almost exactly the same time, in almost exactly the same institution, and produced almost completely opposite results. On one side, Prince Andrew, a man whose association with Jeffrey Epstein destroyed his reputation, cost him his titles, cost him his home, and eventually led to his arrest. On the other side, Meghan Markle, a woman who said the institution failed to protect her, who described suicidal thoughts born of institutional neglect, who left the country entirely and watched the palace investigate her for bullying while Andrew kept his security detail. Two people, one institution. Two very different experiences of what it means to fall from royal grace. And the gap between those two experiences tells you more about the British monarchy in 2026 than any official statement ever could. This is Royal Report Daily. And tonight, we are telling the truth about that gap. Welcome to Royal Report Daily, your #1 destination for real royal news, verified investigations, and the stories the palace doesn't want you to find. I'm your host, and if you are new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because what we cover on this channel, you will not find anywhere else. Every single week, we go deeper, we go further, and we go to places the mainstream media is too afraid to touch. Tonight is one of those nights. Let's get into it. Let us start with Andrew. Because to understand the double standard, you have to understand the full scale of what Andrew did and how long it took the institution to act. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, is the second son of Queen Elizabeth II. For decades, he was one of the most prominent members of the royal family. A Falklands War veteran, a trade envoy, a man whose position seemed unassailable simply by virtue of who his mother was. His friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the American financier who was convicted of sex trafficking minors, began in the 1990s and continued for years. Andrew has always denied any wrongdoing. But the nature and persistence of that friendship, even after Epstein's first conviction in 2008, created a scandal that the palace managed and mismanaged for years. In November 2019, Andrew sat down with BBC journalist Emily Maitlis for a Newsnight interview that became one of the most catastrophic self-inflicted PR disasters in British royal history. He denied having any sexual contact with Virginia Giuffre, who alleged she had been trafficked to him by Epstein when she was 17. He said he had no recollection of ever meeting her. He offered an explanation for why he could not have been at the specific location Giuffre described. He said he had been at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter. He said he could not sweat due to a condition he developed after the Falklands War. The British public watched the interview with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Journalist Emily Maitlis later described it as one of the most extraordinary hours of live television she had ever experienced. And the damage was immediate and severe. Within days, Andrew announced he would step back from royal duties. It was framed as a voluntary decision. The reality was that the palace had concluded his continued public presence was doing too much damage. If you want to understand how the institution handled both of these crises, subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. Because what comes next is where the comparison becomes impossible to ignore. Now let us lay out the timeline clearly. Because the dates matter. In January 2020, Harry and Meghan announced they were stepping back from senior royal duties. In March 2021, the Oprah interview aired. In that same month, the Times published allegations that Meghan had bullied royal staff. Buckingham Palace announced it was launching an investigation into those bullying allegations. The investigation was conducted by the palace's own HR team. Its findings were never published. Not a single word of its conclusions was ever made public. Meghan strongly denied the bullying allegations. Several former employees and allies spoke publicly in her defense. But the investigation, launched with considerable publicity, was quietly buried. Meanwhile, as all of this was happening, Andrew kept his security. Andrew kept his honorary military affiliations. Andrew remained at Royal Lodge, the palace that launched a visible, publicized investigation into Meghan's conduct towards staff. Took years longer to take any formal action against Andrew over allegations involving the sexual exploitation of a minor. Harry noticed. He wrote about it directly in his memoir Spare. He wrote that he told Meghan, "Not in the wake of my Uncle Andrew. He was embroiled in a shameful scandal, accused of the sexual assault of a young woman, Virginia Giuffre, and no one had so much as suggested that he lose his security. Whatever grievances people had against us, sex crimes weren't on the list. But the former Duke of York kept his security while the Duke and Duchess of Sussex lost theirs." That sentence, written by Harry in his own published memoir, is the most direct statement of the double standard that exists in the documented record. Like this video right now, if this investigation is giving you a picture of the royal institution that most outlets never show completely. And subscribe to Royal Report Daily, because what comes next is the most significant development in Andrew's story. In October 2025, something happened that the palace had been resisting for years. King Charles initiated the formal process to strip Andrew of his remaining titles. All of them. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, that is what he is now called. Not Prince Andrew. Not the Duke of York. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, a private citizen. The palace statement was precise and deliberate. It said that King Charles had today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of his younger brother. It confirmed that Andrew would also have to move out of Royal Lodge, the large mansion near Windsor Castle that had been his home for years. The statement included a line that was remarkable in its directness. It said these censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been, and will remain with, the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. That was October 2025, nearly 6 years after the Newsnight interview, nearly 6 years after the initial fallout. The institution had waited 6 years to take formal action against a man accused of sexually exploiting a minor. And in February 2026, the situation became even more serious. Andrew was arrested on suspicions of misconduct in a public office, a development that Wikipedia's documented record of the Andrew Epstein scandal confirms took place in February 2026. Royal historian Kate Williams described Charles's action against Andrew as a huge moment in royal history, noting that the last time a prince or princess was stripped of their royal title was in 1919. Now let us look at what was happening with Meghan during this same period, because the contrast is striking and documented. While Andrew kept his titles, his security, and his home for years after the Newsnight interview, Meghan experienced something very different from the institution during the same period. When the bullying allegations surfaced in March 2021, the palace announced an investigation with notable speed. The Guardian reported it. The Telegraph reported it. The BBC reported it. It became major news immediately. And yet, the investigation into Andrew's conduct, despite years of documented association with a convicted sex trafficker, proceeded at a significantly slower institutional pace. Royal author Leslie Carroll, writing for Fox News in March 2021, made the point directly. She described the palace investigating Meghan, not Prince Andrew, as proof of a double standard by the royal family. She noted that the palace launched a visible public investigation into staff relations while continuing to shield Andrew from formal institutional consequence. Reality T, reporting in August 2025, cited sources close to the situation who described the contrast explicitly. One source noted the institution condemned a woman for occasionally emailing her staff at 5 a.m. while continuing to cover up for, in their words, atrocious Andrew. Whether one agrees with that framing or not, the documented timeline supports the observation that the institution moved faster and more visibly against Meghan than it did against Andrew in the years immediately following both their departures from public royal life. Do not go anywhere. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily and turn on notifications, because the next section covers the palace's own internal reasoning for why these situations were handled differently. And it is more complicated than it first appears. Here is where we have to be completely honest and fair, because the two situations, however differently handled, are not equivalent in their nature, and acknowledging that is important. Andrew's crisis involved serious criminal allegations of sexual exploitation of a minor. that is categorically different from workplace conduct allegations. The legal exposure, the reputational damage, and the institutional risk were of a completely different order. And yet the palace's response to the two crises in terms of timing, visibility, and decisiveness still raises legitimate questions. Okay. Magazine, reporting in 2025, cited royal historian Andrew Loney's book entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. Loney makes a claim that, if accurate, explains something important about why the palace may have been reluctant to pursue the Andrew investigation too aggressively too quickly. He argues that when the Meghan bullying allegations surfaced, the resulting scrutiny set off what insiders described as alarm bells inside the palace, not because of Meghan herself, but because of what the scrutiny might uncover about Andrew. In other words, the palace feared that opening a full investigation into staff treatment would create a framework that would then have to be applied to Andrew. And Andrew's treatment of staff, documented as significantly worse than anything alleged against Meghan, would have been catastrophically damaging if subjected to the same public scrutiny. A source close to the situation put it to OK. Magazine plainly. The report on Markle has never been released, some say because it would also raise questions about the behavior of the Queen's second son. If that analysis is accurate, then the palace's handling of Meghan's situation was shaped not just by its response to her, but by its anxiety about what a full institutional reckoning might reveal about Andrew. Let us talk about what Meghan herself has said about this. Because her account, given during the Oprah interview, speaks directly to the question of institutional protection. She said during that March 2021 conversation with Oprah, they weren't willing to tell the truth to protect me and my husband. She said the family and the people running the institution were two separate things, and it was important to be able to compartmentalize that. She said the Queen had always been wonderful to her personally, but that the institutional machinery had failed her. And she described, in direct and devastating terms, a period during which she contemplated suicide and was told by the institution that it could not help her because she was not a paid employee. Now, some of those claims have been disputed. Some have been partially substantiated. The specific claim about a conversation regarding Archie's skin color was described differently by different members of the family. And the palace has never formally confirmed or denied all elements of the Oprah interview. But the central accusation, that the institution protected some of its members while failing to protect others, is one that the documented record of Andrew's timeline makes difficult to entirely dismiss. Now let us talk about Andrew in 2026. Because his story has not ended. It has in many ways entered its most serious chapter. Stripped of his titles in October 2025. Arrested in February 2026. Facing the kind of institutional, legal, and personal consequences that the palace resisted applying for years. Sarah Ferguson, his ex-wife who remained his closest ally throughout all of it, has described the situation as deeply unfair. She has raised what she calls double standards in how the institution handles different members. Ironically, those claims of double standards echo almost exactly what Harry and Meghan said years earlier. The institution, it seems, does not treat all its members equally. That is not a new accusation. It is a very old one. What is new is how thoroughly the evidence of the past 5 years has documented it. The man who was protected while Meghan's staff conduct was investigated is now being formally stripped of everything. The woman who was investigated for bullying is now running a lifestyle brand in California and appearing on the cover of Harper's Bazaar. History has its own kind of justice, slow, imperfect, and rarely satisfying to anyone waiting for it. Here is what the full story of Andrew and Meghan tells us about the British monarchy in 2026. It tells us that the institution is not a monolith. It does not apply its rules consistently or equitably across all its members. It protects some people for longer than it should. It moves against others faster than their situations perhaps warranted. It manages crises with an eye on institutional survival rather than individual fairness. And it sometimes buries the findings of its own investigations rather than face what those findings might reveal about other, more dangerous problems underneath. These are not comfortable truths. They are not what the palace wants discussed. But they are what the documented record, the timeline, the investigations, the published memoirs, the royal historians' books, the legal proceedings, actually shows. The British monarchy is still standing. It has survived scandals that would have destroyed most institutions. But the gap between how it treated Andrew and how it treated Meghan is a gap that the institution has never fully explained. And in an era when transparency is demanded of every public institution, that unexplained gap is a wound that has not healed. This is Royal Report Daily, and we will keep asking the question the palace would rather not answer, until someone does. That is all for tonight's investigation on Royal Report Daily. If this video made you think, made you feel, or made you see this story differently, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it means everything to this channel. Subscribe if you have not already, and turn on notifications, because we post new investigations every week and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Share this video with one person who follows the royal story, because the more people who know the real truth, the better. I'm your host. This has been Royal Report Daily. Stay informed, stay royal, and I will see you in the next one. One institution, two crises, two very different outcomes. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily and be here when the full truth finally lands.